first meeting that, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sure, how long has it been, JD, since they've had one of these meetings, a committee
We
meeting?
have one about every couple of years.
Every couple of years.
Yes.
Okay, so that's good. Well,
That's how I talked you into doing this too, because you said, I don't want to meet every time. I said, okay, you won't
Well,
meet every time.
I thought it was through attrition. You run out of people. That's what happens. Now, but I do appreciate all of you being here. We're going to have a all about informational meeting. JD wants to say something before we have general statute about what we need to talk about.
Yeah, just an announcement to be clear to the public, and Lois has made this change on the website, but Commissioner Duggan has replaced Commissioner Carter as an official member of this commission. Commissioner Carter and I have talked about this in the last couple of days, and he agreed he wanted to make sure there's no appearance of conflict based on the criteria of this committee. And so out of that caution, Vice Chair Duggan has agreed to step up and be that. So I announce it now. It's on the website. Your official email will be coming out later today. But this is just an information item, so there's no action today.
Yeah. Well, I had to call to order already, so we're going to have the notice. North Carolina General Statute 138A-15 mandates that at the beginning of any meeting of a board, the chair shall remind all members of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest under this subchapter. Chair also shall inquire as to whether there is any known conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board at this time. I will ask, is there any conflict that's known or perceived? Hearing none, then I'll call this meeting to order. I'm going to give a few notes just to kind of a preliminary of what I understand. This meeting today is going to be an informational meeting. We don't expect any action item. Of course, there's none registered either. But the main reason for it is several things. One thing I think we talked about with Richard and JD is there's importance to be able for the EMC as a whole to understand what these permits are. So we're going to ask for a report fairly often from DEQ. And today's going to have some information from DEQ. There are other permits. Of course, there's CAFOs, some from Demler. We'll have that in another meeting. So we're going to split these apart. So DEQ will explain and talk to us about our responsibilities, their responsibilities, what the permits are. And so I think that'll be helpful. The second thing I think is kind of timely. We all received letters from the Southern Environmental Law Center about NPDES, as well as a request to consider taking those permits and putting them back on EPA. We're delegated or DEQ is delegated to be able to take care of those. So it's almost imperative that we understand. I don't make a habit of working with NPDES. I was talking to Forrest back there. We did some work many years ago with animal waste, some of the others, some trout. I've obviously done some stormwater work. I've worked with some others. But I think it's going to be helpful for each of us to understand what the parameters are, what's the responsibilities, and how these permits work, particularly since there is some question from some outside people that's wanting to know about that. I think it does another thing. It helps us understand it, but I think it helps us give support to DEQ and Demler should they need it. We also are the ones, generally speaking, that when somebody's mad, they call us. Now that's all well and good, but if we don't know much about it, we don't have that information, we don't really understand where these permits are why. I think sometimes it's going to be helpful to us to be able to have more of an educational piece. So again, this is an informational meeting. I think Richard is going to talk to us to get it started, and then we'll go on with that. But again, there's going to be some reports. It's going to be some information. I think Julie's going to be able to help us as well, and Michael. So if whoever wants to be first, we're welcome to come talk. And if you want to talk to the committee, it's great too, and as an introduction.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the recognition. I don't have a lot to say to you. We're getting directly into the presentation. Julie Gribb and Michael Montebello will give an overview of the NPDES program, the types of permits they issue, as well as the process that we use to issue those permits. So we're going to let them take it away and look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelton. Good afternoon. I'm Julie Gribb, Deputy Director for the Division of Water Resources. Okay. I'm here today just to talk a little bit on NPDES permits, so I'll go ahead and get started. This isn't old. Okay. First, I'm going to start with this slide because it kind of tells you the big picture of where the NPDES permits are in the DEQ. We handle a good number of them. DWR handles several groups, NPDES permitting. We have a permitting branch, and we do industrial permitting, municipal permitting, and compliance and expedited means a lot of the minor permits. We do 100% domestic wastewater permits, groundwater remediation permits, and reject wastewaters from water treatment plants. That's mainly what's covered in that group. In another section, we have water quality permitting. We have a non-discharge group. They do one NPDES general permit for reclaimed waters. There are 0 applicants or permits at this time in that category. We have animal feeding operations, and we have 3 general permits in that area. They can present at another time to give you more information on that. Daimler has a good number of NPDES permits. They have, just to give you an idea what that is, they have construction stormwater permits. They have a long list of individual and general industrial permits specific to different industrial categories. Okay? And they have what's called an NPDES Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Program, often referred to as MS4. Okay? And so that they have all those permits. Today, I'm going to focus on our water quality NPDES permitting section. This is just a basic org chart of DWR. At the top is Richard Rogers. On the left and right is myself and Michael Projetra. We share different sections. I handle water planning, the water quality regional operations, and then the NPDES permitting branch. Underneath that is just what I told you, municipal permitting, industrial permitting, compliance, and expedited. Something you don't see there is a temporary group for ARPA. Many of you may be aware that the American Rescue Plan Act, signed into law by President Biden on March 11, 2021, provided over $300 billion to the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds to state, local, territorial, and tribal governments. And water and sewer, that meaning drinking water, state revolving loan fund, and the infrastructure investments for the Clean Water Act revolving loan fund were part of the 6 funds that could be used to promote these monies. Okay. And then I will just say on Michael Pagetris, you see he has public water supply. He has the water sciences section and the water quality permitting group that includes the non-discharge that I talked about earlier and the animal operations branch. Okay, so just let's talk a little bit about the water. I'm going to talk today about NPDES permitting branch, specifically one for municipal, industrial, the 100% domestic, groundwater remediation, and water treatment plant reject waters. And that's where a lot of the controversial permits are to some extent. NPDES permitting also issues 8 different general permits to facilities with similar wastewaters. Okay, so we write 1 permit for a single family home, and we issue that same permit to everybody who applies for it. Same for like non-contact cooling water. So we have 8 different general permits. The permitting process includes assessing the quality and quantity of treated wastewaters discharging to the states. And individual permits are written for specific discharge to a specific location and receiving stream. And they are evaluated for what that stream can assimilate, We often use models, and we often collaborate with the regional staff in writing an NPDES permit. This program is administered by EPA to the state of North Carolina. So we have an MOA that I believe you are all copied on as well that we have to follow. They would require for us they look at certain permits, especially our major permits. They review our general permits as well. Not each certificate of coverage issued with the general permit, but the general permit itself. Okay. We report to EPA on violations and any non-compliance. And EPA can often come and help us, and they'll want to do sometimes a joint inspection or a joint audit with staff. As I've said in other meetings, I just want to give you an idea on publicly owned treatment plants that are majors that discharge that have pretreatment programs. There are other ones too that are major, but without pretreatment programs. But just the ones alone with pretreatment programs discharge over 1,188 million gallons per day to our surface waters. And our industrial dischargers, majors, about 59 or so, discharge greater than 305 million gallons per day. There are another 134 or so minor industrial permits not included in these values. So a lot of wastewater go into our streams. So wanted to give you a feel for the numbers that we're talking about today. We often discuss permits, individual permits as either majors or minors. Major municipal permits are all those that discharge greater than 1 million gallons a day or have a pretreatment program. And there's 158 of those. Industrial majors are based on a rating system that EPA created. You look at whether it's going to a high quality water stream, whether it's processed wastewater or simply non-contact cooling water, but it's a rating system and it evaluates whether it's a major or a minor industrial permit. So we have 59 of those, and we have 2 major water treatment plants. For minors, we have a lot of municipal wastewater treatment plants, industrial, 134, 100% domestic wastewaters, or a big number of our facilities, schools, just schools and small businesses, things like that, they take care of 100% domestic. Groundwater remediation sites, a lot of them are petroleum-based, and then a great deal number of water treatment plants. So you can see we have over 1,000 permits. I just want to point out that the POTWs with pretreatment programs that have significant industry going to them, there's about 628 permitted significant industrial users. So if you look at that number, 628, and you compare it to the industrial direct discharges, 59 and 134, you can see that the majority of our industrial permittees are going to municipalities, publicly owned treatment works. Okay. And our pretreatment staff works with them and help oversee those programs. And they process greater than 280 industrial user permits, renewals, modifications, headworks analysis, and long-term mining programs jointly with the municipal pretreatment programs. Just to give you an idea of what we issued in the last year, for 2022, you can see for major permits, we've issued 26, and 23, we issued 43. You can see the minors, and you're seeing some increases, especially related to municipal permits. And that's a lot to do with ARPA. We've gotten extra staff in the ARPA program. We expect our NPDES staff probably to issue greater than 200 to 300 additional permits because of ARPA. Not always in an NPDES category. It could be fast track permits and other types of permits for sewers and so on. But because of all these funds coming in, we're working hard to issue a lot more permits. And I gotta have to say, when I brag on them, because we're really keeping up with it, we're doing a great job. And not only that, we've reduced backlog. We've reduced the municipal unit backlog from 20% at the last year to 13.6%. And our compliance and expedited group has reduced backlog from 24.8% to close to 15% this past year. So we're very proud of that. We also have general permits, and this is a list of those 8 general permits that I talked about earlier. We have over 1,700 of those. And they're all different categories, and that's an idea of how many active. So when you get a general permit, you get a certificate of coverage with that permit that lists the name of the facility and some other information. And then attached to it comes a general permit, so they know what their limits are and what they have to meet. This is an example of what we issued in the last year. So what happens is all permits are issued for a 5-year period. Okay, and so we did not have any general permit renewals in the last 2 years, in 2022 or 2023. So you're not seeing, generally they're all reissued all at once, but new ones come in all the time. So that's what you're seeing reflected up here is new permits coming in. I will go on to say that we have about 4 of these general permits expiring next year. So that will be a big year for us to rewrite all those general permits, get them approved by EPA, and reissue them and reissue all their certificate of coverages as well. So that will be a big job, and we're already getting prepared for that. And in addition to 4 expiring, we have 1 aquaculture permit. That's NC G53 up there. And we are rewriting that right now, working jointly with the agriculture facilities, the Department of Ag, and other agencies to get that done. So we'll be very busy in this area for the coming year. And I believe I'm going to let Michael go and do the rest for us this time.
Thank you.
You can go ahead with it.
Sure. Yeah. So good afternoon. I'm Mike Montebello. I'm the NPDES branch chief. I'm responsible for the municipal, industrial, and compliance and expedited group, as well as this temporary ARPA group. I'm switching the slides because I really just want to go over just like a high level review of the different steps that are involved in an NPDES permit action. So typically if you start with the permit application, that's the first step in the process. Then we generally send a draft permit to the applicant after some period of review. And then the next step would be typically the proposed permit for public notice. There's always an opportunity for a public hearing, depending on the comments that we might receive from the public notice process. And then there's a permit decision point as far as what final permit action that we would take, either permit issuance or denial. And then after the permit's issued, there's always the issued permit appeals process. That's typically an administrative law court, OIH type process that's available for any applicant. And then after that process, there's state superior court appeals process. And this is a very broad, generalized overview of the permit process. I'm going to go back one step. This is a more descriptive step-by-step point, and I'm not going to read through this. This is primarily there. You'll see this. This is what we have on our website that kind of describes the overall NPDES permit process. It gives a little more detail on timing and how long things are public noticed and when things have to occur. So we provided that so you can get a general idea for those activities. And then also as part of the permit application process, you know, we might have an initial application and there may be follow-ups with the applicant to help resolve concerns. We may be discussing issues with the permit applicant about their application. In addition, before the application typically comes in, we deal with speculative effluent limits. It's typically in advance of the permit, and we have multiple opportunities to talk with the applicant about their effluent limits, what kind of requirements they might have. And then as part of the draft permit review, applicant a courtesy copy of a draft permit if there's some specific concerns that are addressed. And this is typically for the major permits or for permittees that have concerns about specific conditions that might be in their permit. So one of the processes here is we've started a look at other states. we're reviewing these different states' requirements. South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, California, New Jersey, and New York. Their staff are talking to the staff in the other states to try to get an idea of their processes and what they do and what their process is. And we've had good success so far talking with Tennessee and New York and New Jersey. It's difficult to get everyone's staff together, and sometimes they want their legal staff. So we've had some good success with that so far. So some information we have. So some states like South Carolina and Virginia send a draft permit to their applicant before the actual public notice. And this can be done for some group of permits like majors, all the permits, or possibly controversial permits. And then for different states, these kind of timeframes vary depending on which states you have. And the addition of this step, which is before the public notice process, sometimes slows down the permit action. The NPDES permits can be expired but continued, and they might remain expired a bit longer. And always after this step, there's still a public notice process step after the draft process. So if you look at permit review, when a permit can be looked at, there's typically 4 places where it might be. So the permit review might be before the final permit is issued or public noticed. As an example, Virginia has a provision in their administrative code which talks about non-binding mediation. And from our conversations with the Virginia staff, they said this is very infrequently used. It's there, but it's available. The other possible place is a permit review after a public hearing has already been scheduled. Virginia has what's known as a controversial permit provision, which is after a public hearing is done, they have to report the actions of the public hearing to another group. The typical time is after a permit is issued. So the permit's issued, that's typically the way many states handle review. Usually there's a period of time for an appeal, typically 30 days, and the appeal is typically to some administrative law court or other OAH process. And from our discussions with these states, we've also learned that there are also some states that have a review after the administrative law court process. So like in New Jersey, the commissioner can actually review the administrative law court process response and make some other decision. In Tennessee, a board can review the recommendations from the administrative law court. And then after those decisions, there's still circuit court and other things. A lot of states have an informal process in place after a permit's appealed, which might include mediation or settlement discussions. North Carolina typically uses this approach. South Carolina does also, where there might be some mediation so that you don't actually have the full litigation process. You try to settle the actions with that. Some features from Virginia include Virginia does share a copy of the draft permit with their applicant prior to placing it on public notice. And like I said before, the controversial permits, that's after a public hearing has been granted, and Virginia has a permitting ombudsman to help with folks that are dealing with permit issues. So some next steps, what are we doing? So myself and staff are following up with the other states, try to get more information. For this group, we'd like to have better charts and like specific processes that each of the states use. We'd like to consider these states, and then we probably want to bring what those processes are and information that might be useful. We just met with the state of New York this past week. One of the things they brought to us was they do not share their draft permit with their applicant because they're concerned about public information and litigation issues. So they might talk to the permittee about changes in their permit, but they don't actually share the actual permit before it goes to public notice. And those are the kind of nuances that could happen. And so we'll try to have these different states and what their processes are. So That's basically just a summary. And we have a lot more to do because it's hard to get staff from every state, the right staff that know the permitting process to talk to us about that. And we'd like to bring that to the group.
Do we have questions?
No, I was just going to add, I think one thing that we see from Mike's presentation, Mike and Julie did a good job of being brief and to the point. Good job. But there's a lot of flexibility here with how EPA lets states do their NPDES programs in these different states. We are statutorily responsible as an EMC for permitting, which we have delegated by our own rule to the department. But basically what we've done, and we haven't revisited this in almost 2 decades, is we just throw it over the wall and whatever happens on the back end happens. And our applicants end up either having to go to court or go to the General Assembly. And I said last time, we've seen a couple of these things pop up from the General Assembly to get involved. And I don't think DEQ or the EMC would prefer that. I don't think most people won't, I think we're as close to anybody to help both DEQ and the applicants through this process because these permits are issued in the name of the EMC, under the authority of the EMC. So the questions before us are really, do we want to have any other involvement than what we're doing? And we may all say as an EMC, nope, throw it over the wall, don't get involved, just let it fall out on the back end. That's an option. That's one extreme, right? That's one alternative. The other alternative, some other alternatives could be, how do we get this information reported to us from the department? This is great information. If nothing else, these are the permits we're issuing. These are the controversies. This EMC's not had that happen on a regular basis in recent years. And we need to have that because it's issued in our name. But beyond that, there's also other states that involve bodies like ours. Now, not every state has a body like ours. California is one that may look weird to some of you, but it does have a volunteer body that could review these permits, right? Unusual, but they do. It's kind of like us. South Carolina does it, Virginia does it. So the question there gets into the question of if we are to be a little more involved and to help DEQ in some ways and the applicants in some ways get to this before it gets out of hand or gets too controversial, where do we do that? Would we do that at the public comment period? Would we be the hearing officers for a public hearing? How would we want to be involved in that? And we can write this because it's in our rule. This is our legislative authority, again, or not. But the end point here is other states are doing this different ways. And so this first step is really to look at what other states under EPA are doing to administer their NPDES program. And can we make our program better? Some other things that we could consider that's come up is general permit versus individual permits. We could limit this. I came out of the bat and said we need to limit this mainly to industrial and municipal. But this could spread into ag or stormwater too. It's really up to this committee and the full EMC in the next few meetings we may have to talk about information here of where your interest lies and where you think our responsibilities and our duties really are. So I stop with that and throw it out and just, Mr. Chairman, Mr. New Chairman, I know you just had an information, get to know your meeting today, but I think those issues can be considered next time as we have more presentations, or you may want to talk about some of them today. Your leisure.
Appreciate that and appreciate the comments as well. Do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, in reference to what Chairman Solomon had just mentioned in general permits, and I have a question on one of the slides for Julie, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman, that she
Sure.
presented in the beginning. It's the slide on, I think it's number 8, on the category description. She had 8 general permits listed, certificates of coverage. That's it. I guess what sticks out here is on the surface water piece and what we're going through to water quality, and this tied in somewhat, is that the single family residence, about 77, a little over 70% of what we've got there is 1,700. Yeah, you're looking at the same one. So the single family residences, can you help me understand how the residences part fits into this? Give me an example of a residence needing an NPDES permit.
Sure, it's simply a house.
70% or more off the top
Oh,
of my
you know,
understanding.
no, that's the majority that we receive without a question. It's just simply a house, let's say usually up in Durham, around the lake or somewhere, and they're just a single-family home, any household. And they they're going to put in a septic system. And a septic system can either have a drainage field that it goes to, that is handled by the Department of Health. But sometimes it doesn't have a drain field, it goes directly to a water body. And when it goes directly to a water body, that's when we get involved and we have to issue an NPDES permit.
Which the water body is generally going to be surface water, correct?
Yes, it always will be surface. Well, it should be. It can go to culverts and things like that that lead to a surface water.
Right, right. Okay, that helps me. The second question I have is this, are these individual lots normally in subdivisions that's been sort of, I'd say, vetted through county or municipalities for permitting or for conceptual or preliminary plans for subdivisions? Or are they single acreage houses? Have you broken that down?
I'm going to say the answer to that's all over the place. Okay. We know for a fact in some areas sewer lines run right about past these homes. And for mostly financial reasons aren't connected to them. And it's a choice of the municipality, not up to us.
But it's still a permitting process, and speaking of public hearings and making it outside a general permit into another permitting piece, then the value of that property being a subdivision and having to go through the permitting piece to qualify the lots for that subdivision, being it 5 or more in some counties, or up to 20, maybe 60 or 80, and set it aside, seepage fields or leach fields alongside of streams, rivers, lakes, ponds, any surface water. I'm just trying to get my arms wrapped around, that's a large number. That's, like I said, over 70% of what you've got is residents, single-family residents. I guess my follow-up question, Mr. Chairman, as I could, is just needing more information, since it's such a large number, and how it affects all of the state, where it is. Is it in the regions? Is it in eastern North Carolina, the Piedmont, or out west?
That was a question I was going to ask her, because she mentioned most of them are in Durham.
Well, a lot of them are in Durham, but there's a lot out west as well. A lot of them are in big areas where there's a lot of acreage. It really varies. I'm sure we have a map of them. I'm glad to provide that to you.
Is there some regulation or some local thing with that Durham would be higher? I know it's the Triassic Basin from soil types, but I'm just interested in why Durham would be the majority of them.
It's just the way it happened. It's not something we've had any control over.
Okay.
Now, let me add too, while we're on general, there's a lot more in the NPDES unit about general, and a lot of people depend on general, as Commissioner Bailey knows from her days at Martin Marietta. But one of the issues, like with 53,000 there with the fish and seafood packages, is one that General Assembly got us involved in earlier, late last year in December, to say, hey, there's an impasse. We've gone back and forth on the general permit. And the real issue there, if y'all remember, when Keith Larrick talked to us from Farm Bureau, was that the general permit got so many stuff on it that the general permit users felt like they had an individual permit. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that was the perception. And so that's one of the things, as you guys start thinking about where does general permits fall into individual permits, you know, the requirements could go up on any of these general permits, and that's where we may hear some complaints from people. They look too much, they're too costly, or too much like an individual permit. And should they just be an individual permit? So I'm not saying that's the case. I'm not defending it either way. I'm just saying would be something we may hear from the public, or that we've already been asked by the General Assembly to look at as an EMC. So food for thought.
Just curiosity. Yeah, you had mentioned the fact that, sometimes those individual residents would have sewer lines running right past them, right past the house, and the municipality, for whatever reason, it's not hooking up to that line.
Mhm.
Is that based on anything in particular, like the municipality is simply a gravity-fed type system, and they don't want the expense of lift stations, or?
So this is strictly a municipality question, okay, to ask them why that has or has not happened, to be honest. But my knowledge of it is that a lot of times it's very expensive. The municipality will run a line by your house, but you have to spend the $5,000 to $10,000 to hook it up. So a lot of the reasons appear to be financial reasons, that they can't get a line from their house to the sewer line.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. When I agreed to make this chairmanship, we had a meeting with Julie and Michael and Richard, of course, JD, and I wrote down two things just for questions, and I think one of them's been answered already, obviously, and it was, has any permit responsibility been delegated from EMC to DWR and Demler? And obviously that it has been. I don't know the date of that. We might be able to get the date of when that happened. That would be interesting. The other thing is, I asked was to myself and wrote it down, it was, what role does the EMC have? And I think that's what JD and that we've got to come up with. There is, what role do we want to play? What role do we have to play? What's the statute say? What's the expectation from the legislature? What's the expectation from the public? What is it we should be doing with these permits? If anything, it's just something to look at. So those are questions that I'd like for you to consider and start thinking about. Most of you are living in counties that have municipalities. They're having to deal with a lot of permits. They, from a lot of different reasons, not only DWR, but again, Demler, they're having to do stormwater work. That's become a huge thing. A lot of little towns are having a very difficult time paying for the new rules that we just enacted. I think we approved back in, was it January? One of my first meetings, we added to those. So that we do have a responsibility for a lot of these type of permits, but how far in the weeds do we want to go? The other thing that I wrote down is when somebody does call you, well, municipality, your friend, you're at the football game and the mayor said, man, you're on that program. I've got a real issue or I got an idea. How far do you want us to go? I think if we could learn to work together on those kind of things, I think it'd be very helpful. So I kind of think that's where we need to be, particularly when we get a letter from a group that wants to abandon that. At some point, I'd like somebody to ask me or to address it. It's not today, but start thinking about this. Why did they get that letter? Why did we get that letter to start with? Whose responsibility is it to write back to them? Who's going to write to EPA? I'm just curious.
We might talk about it a little bit tomorrow, but not today.
Oh, you will?
Yeah, we will.
Okay, well, that's fine. That was another question I had. When somebody from the public sends a letter and it's addressed to a federal agency, that it's something, I think it's something that who's going to take the heat on it, who's going to respond. So I think it's something for us to look at. Yes.
Thank you. Just a comment, maybe a question or two. Well, I'll start with a question. How did you select the states that you're doing a closer look see on?
I believe, JD.
Can I answer that one?
Sure.
So Chairman Solomon recommended them?
Chairman Solomon just asked around a little bit and somebody said, hey, South Carolina and Virginia do this. And Mike used to be in South Carolina, so that seemed to be obvious. Tennessee then looked obvious to me. I went to Tennessee and just went to the website and they seem to have some kind of process. It's very hard to determine, by the way, about how it all interplays. But I did understand from past experience, California had a Water Resources Board. They were kind of like us, and they looked at some of these applications. And in New York and New Jersey, I understood were more administrative. Like I believe it's New York. One of the two of them doesn't really they don't have a board like this, but they let their council of state look at these controversial permits. And I'll get that wrong. But it's some administrative process of maybe Department of Commerce or different people look at it to review them. because they don't have something like this. So I just gave them, me and Richard talked, and we just got 6 or 8 together, and they're 3 of them are neighboring states. And really looking for you guys to give us some advice. Do you want to see Georgia? Do you want to see Florida? Georgia's got an organization like ours. Florida, I mean, it's really up to you guys, which states. Please give input if you've got states, or if you want to look specifically at where in the process that we could be involved, or how does that process even work? Do people ask us, either the department or the applicant? Do we have to take a request, or can we just pass on it if we don't want to be involved? Again, that's Mike's thing about controversial projects. In Virginia, they're classifying them as, who comes up with that? But all those questions are things that we've seen the EPA do in other places and allow. And maybe we take a look at it and see. So.
I asked that because I was just curious if there was specific criteria for choosing those states. I mean, oftentimes we do look at neighboring states for air quality, and I can understand why it's a natural tendency to look at them for water quality too. But I also wondered if states, if anything was considered about the industry profile of the state, the topography, hydrology of the states, the demographics, population growth rates, things such as that in selecting these states. But and then after that, I have a comment.
Do you have?
Yeah, I was going to follow up, just so it's clear. The NPDES process gets approved to a state in pieces. So a state doesn't necessarily have all the pieces to write. For example, New York has the NPDES program, but they do not have the pretreatment program. So EPA actually runs the pretreatment program for the state of New York. So you have to be delegated the NPDES program, and then the general permit program, and then the MS4 program, and then the pretreatment, and then sludge, which pretty much no one has. And so it depends on the state what you have. It's kind of, that's what the situation is. And so even a state as big as New York is not dealing with all their industrial customers. They're not having to do that. EPA has to do it.
And so I think it's a fair question, and we may want to add a state, especially that has the industrial facilities that we have, because that's where most of the controversy is, right? That's where most of the concerns are.
Okay. And then my comment, if, with all due respect, Chairman Solomon, I don't think the phrase "throw it over the wall" is a very good phrase to use for describing our delegation to the staff. The last I looked, this commission is comprised of, by statute, 1 wastewater engineer at most, whereas we have a full staff of wastewater engineers working on this NPDES program and writing and analyzing for these permits. This body is not qualified as engineers to write permits and to change engineering specifications in permit decisions. So we are in an oversight role, and I believe that 20, 30 years ago, when this body decided that it was most appropriate to delegate to a qualified staff of engineers and scientists who have the people power and the training and experience to work with municipalities and in industry in establishing the best permits that are protective of our mission to protect water and public health. I think that was the appropriate path to take. Now, I will say that I have sat on this committee for a number of years, off and on, when the committee was in place. And our responsibility typically has been to deal with special variances that are being requested. For example, the color variance, which recurred periodically with the Canton paper mill on the Pigeon River. And then there was a salt variance associated with a pickle production facility. And then the other case was dealing with a endangered species, the Carolina heel splitter, I believe, over near Charlotte in one of those watersheds. So this this committee has been created to take exceptional cases in NPDES permitting that are more policy-oriented or variance-related that involve, as you might say, high-profile, very high-profile cases that has a lot of public interest in it. And in those cases, two of the three, the two variances, especially with Canton, we traditionally had a hearing officer from the Environmental Management Commission serve that role. So it was actually two hearing officers at times. And I've been in that role before. So I think there are perhaps unique NPDES situations where we can help. And then the rest of the time, I do believe that it's appropriate to rely on our trained and qualified staff to do the yeoman's work that's needed to process permits. So those are my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dearday.
And I won't get into rebuttal, but please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying not to rely on staff. I'm not saying the EMC is going to do 1,000 permits a year. I am saying, though, we're probably a little bit more closer to the action. And by statute, we are in the action than, say, the courts or the General Assembly. That shouldn't be the first place people go past the staff. We do have statutorily some responsibility for whether we gave it away or not. And that's just a question I'm asking. I'm not saying the staff's not competent, not at all. I'm saying they are competent, and I'm saying this committee, this group, this EMC can decide if we need to look deeper or not, but we do need to understand the issues.
Well, I think it's important that we all understand the NPDES program, but I do think that a lot of careful thought and consideration was given to delegating this responsibility to the staff years ago. We had nationally respected leadership from a wastewater engineering perspective on this commission for 10 years at least during the 1990s and early 10s. Making very wise decisions about the delegation to the staff when it was appropriate. Now, there is one aspect of NPDES that I do think that we could certainly provide more attention to, and that is the pretreatment program. It is, we rely on the communities to monitor it and to administer it. We've delegated it to the communities. But I do think the department needs staff who can help monitor the effectiveness of those pretreatment programs through auditing programs like we do with soil and water or stormwater erosion, things like that. So I do think there is a lot of room for improvement in strengthening the state's oversight of pretreatment programs that are delegated to municipalities. It would be helpful to the municipalities too, I believe.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Leary, were you going to say something?
I did have a question.
Yes, sir.
So again, I appreciate the comments. I do think if we're in this phase of learning more, I know I am, it would be useful to get a perspective from the EPA and whether or not the performance of the North Carolina activities is superior, average, or inferior, whether their assessment, and if there are some best practices at the national level that we could be made aware of. So again, I really know little about the program. I'm excited to hear more and excited to and appreciated the presentations today.
Good, and that's exactly the reason we're trying to do this. We want to make sure everybody is, well, most of us haven't the experience that Miriam has. It maybe Yvonne, because she has spent a lot of time with Martin Marietta with their general permits. So I think it's helpful to learn these things. The one thing that I will bring up, you brought up about the variance, color variance at the Canton Mill. I live just a few miles from there. I'm very familiar with that. And I can remember when that permit was delegated back to EPA, and it took 5 years and almost put the plant out of business at the time till they got their permits. So it's when you start changing things, it's when you can really think, well, this is great. So I think it's great timing, Chairman Solomon, just thinking about this letter that we have asking EPA to take it back. You realize what that means, and so I think we need to have this educational piece. hopefully, we can have Demler talk to us next time. We have a meeting on their parts of these permits. The thing that I will leave us with, you had a comment. Oh, yeah, well, before I do that, I want to add, there's some things that we probably need to make sure that we always keep in mind that we're here to help. And that's where we need to be. And if we can figure out ways, if they ask for help, we should be able to provide it. Same thing with them. And so I'm hoping that's what we can accomplish with this. And that's, your comment there was pretty well. Commissioner King.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make reference to a piece that will come, I'm sure, at the 2 o'clock meeting for water quality. But under Environmental Management Commission, listening to Commissioner Deerhake, Commissioner Solomon, and yourself in the presentation, Commissioner Leary, is that Environmental Management Commission, Statute 143B-282, Environmental Management Commission creation powers and duties. One of those is under Section 6D. The Environmental Management Commission may adopt rules, may, not shall, setting out strategies necessary for ensuring the water quality standards are met by any point or non-point source, or by any category of point or non-point sources that is determined by the commission to be contributing to the water quality impairment. These strategies may include, but not are limited to, additional monitoring, effluent limitations, supplemental standards or classifications, best management practices, protective buffers, schedules of compliance, and the establishment and of delegations to intergovernmental base-wide groups. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, I'm just reading straight from the statute and applaud the NPDES group and the committee and all that the department is doing and what you're doing, Mr. Chairman, as leading the NPDES committee. Thank you.
Any other comments from anyone? You sure? Any others? Anything from the chair? Okay. You're good? You're good? Mr. Carter, Commissioner Carter, anything to comment on? Okay, then I think what we'll do is adjourn this meeting. And as a chair, I can say that without a second. So this meeting is one of the few things that a chair can really do. Thank you for meeting with us today. Yeah.
Thank you.